Hello, all, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Jessie Bengoa, and today is a great day to talk nutrition. We are firmly in our wheelhouse today, ladies and gentlemen, and we're digging into demystifying, uncomplicating, and breaking down the question every writer inevitably grapples with at some point. So, what should I actually be feeding my horse? And I have to say, the topic of today's show actually came to be because a call from one of my favorites who is right here joining us today, and that's my dear friend, Dr. Amy Polkes. And Dr. Polkes has sat right here on the podcast with me a few times, and she's usually here talking all things ulcers or metabolic cases or equine cardiology, for which she is a renowned expert. But she called me wanting to dive into nutrition. And for those of you that haven't heard our prior conversations, Dr. Polkes is a board-certified equine internal medicine specialist and a widely respected veterinarian who operates equine IMED, or internal medicine and diagnostic services, within the greater Virginia and Maryland area. And she's the second and third opinion veterinarian that other veterinarians turn to for tough cases. So I'll let Dr. Polkes fill you in on why she made that call and why this episode came to be, and also why she's so passionate about nutrition, especially given the cases that she sees on the daily. But before we get into that, let's introduce the man of the hour, the guy sitting here with us, and take a quick minute to let you get to know Dr. Matt Durham. So for those of you listening who are regulars here, you have certainly met Dr. Matt Durham more than a time or two, but I'll never miss an opportunity to brag on him real quick. Dr. Durham is a very well-known equine veterinarian who's board certified in equine sports medicine and rehabilitation. And he practiced for over 20 years in the Bay Area of California. And he treated sport horses of numerous disciplines at, the highest level of international competition. And Dr. Durham is like a walking encyclopedia, and I love to learn from him. He is a rare combination of a scholar of veterinary medicine, but also someone with incredible hands-on experience treating horses over decades, not to date him. We're very proud to have him as our senior veterinarian here at Platinum Performance these days. And what's most special about that to me is that before he joined us, he was a client of Platinum since literally day one. So welcome to both of you, Dr. Polkes and Dr. Durham. Let's get into it, shall we?
So much.
Yes.
Thank you, Jessie.
I love to have two of my favorites here. It's fun to talk to your friends about all the things. And I want to walk through a topic that's obviously very central to all of us on Dr. Polkes' suggestion, and that's equine nutrition. And we're going to answer the question of what should you actually be feeding your horse? Things to consider, the questions to ask, and lifting the veil per se. It doesn't actually need to be that complicated. So we're going to dig into that. And Dr. Polkes, let me swing over to you first, ma'am. Why are we here, Amy Polkes? Tell our audience why you called me. Why'd you call me? And suggest that we dig into this topic on the podcast. Why'd you make that call?
Thank you, Jessie. So in my practice, I certainly see lots of different cases from respiratory, cardiac, and I also do a lot of gastroenterology. But one of the main things that comes up is just overall nutrition. And, there's not a lot of guidance sometimes on what people should be feeding their horses. There are not a lot of equine nutritionists that are out there. And as a veterinarian, I certainly have some background in nutrition, but I always want to look at everything that the horse is getting. Are they getting hay? What kind of grain, what kind of supplements, and sort of found a theme of people not really knowing sometimes even what their own horses were getting in, a boarding situation, or really understanding how they should be feeding, what they should be looking at, and found horses that were both underfed and overfed, and just even sometimes fed many things that might have overlapping ingredients that we have to worry about, too much of something, too little of something. And just finding myself doing a lot of education to single, clients or barns, and thought, well, this would be great for a wider audience. So I went to Jessie. So that's, where I think that we could really have a discussion about what you should be looking for.
Amazing. And anytime I can be Dr. Amy Polkes' phone a friend, I've had a good day. I've had a good day, yo. So, Platinum is coming up on our 30th anniversary in 2026, which is something we're incredibly proud of. It's a big deal. 30 years is a long time. But none of this would be in motion. None of this progress would have been made, would have happened on behalf of the horse if it weren't for Dr. Doug Herthel. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Dr. Herthel is an equine veterinarian celebrated throughout the world as really a visionary who helped revolutionize several aspects of equine veterinary medicine throughout his 50-plus year career. Things like hardware used in fracture repair, suture techniques still used today in colic surgery, the use of hyperbaric oxygen therapy in post-operative and post-injury healing, equine mesenchymal stem cells for soft tissue repair, and a host of other conditions, and the use of nutrition as a means to influence the biology of the horse. And he founded Platinum Performance with that goal. And he was called crazy back then by a lot of people in the profession. And he spent years researching and educating on omega-3 fatty acids before the world had accepted them and the impact that we now know they have. He spoke about antioxidants, amino acids, vitamins, and the trace minerals that at the time weren't necessarily considered as all that important. And, Doug, he thought differently. He was humbly very bold. And he really helped set in motion this massive shift in how we think about equine nutrition and how we use nutrition to help support greater longevity, health, performance, and certainly recovery in our horses. So I want to talk Dr. Durham about this for just a minute, because you were there. I mean, uniquely, you were actually there at Alamo Pintado Equine. Not to date you, Dr. Durham. You were there at Alamo Pintado Equine, the practice that Dr. Herthel founded in 1972, that has become a center of innovation recognized around the world. And you were there doing your internship at the very beginning of your career. And it was at that time, talk about the ultimate coincidence and full circle moment. It was at that time that Dr. Herthel was deep into his research on nutrition, and that the very first test buckets of what would become Platinum Performance were being made. And this is not going to be a purely Platinum Performance discussion today, but because, this is the world we live in. What was Dr. Herthel's philosophy on equine nutrition, and how was it different? Is it different from what was commonplace at that time and even still today in some cases?
Yeah, I think it was a revelation for me when I was there, because in vet school, and in undergrad too, I studied, animal science. So I had a good nutrition background, but it was really about ticking the boxes, about the macronutrients and making sure that an animal had enough calories and that they were getting the protein and the big chunks. And that's still true today, right? We have to meet those. But for Dr. Herthel, it went way beyond that. And one of the things I wanted to say is that, when he started in 1972, it was just him and Sue and a car, and he did surgeries in his backyard. He didn't start off with what we think of as sort of a palace in terms of surgical and medical facilities in the world today. And I think really one of the things that I understood with my time there was how much he loved horses. That was what drove him. he always wanted to do a little bit better. And I think because he ended up attracting a lot of elite horses, the horses that needed to not just be okay. I think part of what I learned as my philosophy is that a lot of the standards that are taught in nutrition and in other things are to keep the horse alive. Are they going to die? Nope. Okay, good. We checked that box. And that's not really enough. For me, I want the horse not just, great. We want to keep them alive. But that should be the bare minimum threshold, right? We want these horses to thrive. And this is not just, the Olympic horses. This is the backyard buddy that hopefully lives, into their 30s and is still sound. We want to there and part of his philosophy was that nutrition goes beyond just the fuel, which again is still critical, and there are ways we can tune that still, but that he wasn't just feeding, 1,000-pound animal, he was feeding trillions of cells, and he really thought of each type of cell when he was thinking about it. When other people were watching the Lakers play, he was up late reading about selenium or acetylmerstoliate or things like that. So that was really inspiring to me, that nutrition goes beyond fuel, and it really opened up a new world to me, and I've been able to use that throughout my career to enhance horses' lives.
Yeah, I mean, that unique perspective that you have, not many people can say they were there at day one of this. Dr. Polkes, you're seeing cases in the field every day, and they run the gamut in terms of conditions that they're experiencing. But why do you, as an equine veterinarian, why do you bring nutrition into every case discussion with your clients? Because I know we talk about this a lot at Platinum, every case, every time. But there's still, not everyone is doing that. So because there are a lot of riders and even veterinarians who don't necessarily realize that nutrition plays a central role in maintaining health, it does that, yes, but it also plays a role in nearly every known equine disease state and recovery. So why do you choose to bring that into every case discussion?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And also to bring, to Matt's point too, is that um, we have to just think not just of the broader thing, but all the other, processes that are going on. And so when I'm looking at my cases, and for, gastroenterology in particular, I do a lot of gastroscopy, abdominal ultrasound, and we do have to understand how horses were designed. They don't have the best GI system, and they were designed as natural grazers. They were, they walk miles in the wild. They are a forage based eater. And we have to remember that that's how their body was built. They don't have a gallbladder, so they have, gastric acid constantly going in there. And when we make alterations, even just to their general diet or how we're managing them, whether they, time turned out, socialization with friends, all those things are really important. But just like you and I, like what we put into our bodies matters. And it's the same thing with horses. And I think that there are things that can be potentially harmful. There are things that are innocuous, but maybe they don't need. And then there are things that may not be appropriate for the particular horse, discipline, disease state, etc. And I think it's really important to know everything that's going in them, because sometimes if I'm looking at a horse and let's say I diagnose gastric ulcer disease, but I don't figure out sort of the why, we could just go round and round and round and keep treating them. And I've spoken about that on my other podcast on gastric ulcer disease. But part of that does have to do with nutrition and what we're feeding them. So let's take a performance horse, for example. If somebody is concerned because of their body condition, because of, some reason that I and them, they are seeing them. And I look and I see that according to whatever feed that they're feeding them, that horse would need 8 pounds of feed a day to meet what the bag says for nutrition, but they're only getting 3 pounds of that. And so that, that horse is being under nutrition. Where else could they be meeting it? They may be getting another supplement like Platinum Performance or others that could be meeting some of the other nutritional requirements. But it's really important that we look at all of those things, because if they're not getting the proper nutrition, then they can't, heal wounds. They can't, digest properly. They are at a higher risk for injuries, just like we are. And so when we don't think about nutrition, I think we are just missing something that's incredibly important. And, the most important thing really for health, for general overall health, no matter what condition that we're talking about.
100%. And, Platinum's kind of always been at the intersection of human and equine nutrition. And I feel like of late, in the last decade or so, it's a lot easier to explain to, our clients, horse owners in general, by saying, look at human athletes, look at how far we've come, look at the difference in a Tom Brady, for instance, an athlete that's been able to stay at the top of the game until well past, life expectancy of a football career. But look at the root cause of that success. Look at the attention paid to conditioning, look at the attention paid to diet, and how that really does matter. It's part of an important root cause approach. And I love that that's how you handle your cases, is it's not a pill for every ill. It's what caused this, because it's going to come back if we don't examine the root cause. So Dr. Durham, to further that point, why? Why is nutrition so important to optimize these horses? And for horses that we're riding and training and competing, in particular, the equine athletes, what's the why?
It comes down to that idea that we want horses to thrive, not just survive. And so for what Dr. Polkes is saying, about healing, about normal function of all these things, growing hoof, rebuilding muscle, replenishing the glycogen stores after exercise, clearing lactic acid, all of these little bits and pieces can be steered through nutrition. And even just energy, we think of, energy in, energy out, but it's a lot more, there are a lot more layers to it than that. One of the ways that energy is measured in feeds is where they actually take the feed and they burn it up and they measure how much heat is produced. Well, that's the 100% of the energy in that, say, hay. But we know that when you feed hay to a horse, that some of it ends up on the ground behind them, right? And once they've extracted it, even say in muscle, not all of the energy that's available in the muscle goes to actual movement. A lot of it ends up as heat. So there's a lot of waste of that energy initially going in. And there are some things that can be done to improve feed efficiency. And it's a term that I think is really, it doesn't get used in equine medicine very much. It's usually, if you're trying to grow more wool or milk or meat, then you're measuring how many calories per dollar you're going to get out the other end. With horses, we should still think of that, though, in terms of if you feed two horses the same ration, some horses are going to be more efficient at extracting nutrition from that. So there are a couple things that we can, making sure their teeth are in good shape, making sure they don't have a big parasite load. A lot of those things are important. But one of the things, to go back to what Dr. Polkes was talking about in terms of how horses are plumbed, if you compare a cow and a horse, they're both fermenters. So on one hand, remarkably, neither of those animals can digest cellulose, which is the main thing that they eat, right? In hay, cellulose, their bodies do not have an enzyme that can break that down. So they rely on the microbes in the gut, in the rumen in cattle up front, or the cecum and colon back at the other end in horses. So that's mostly bacteria, but also fungal organisms are really important there. The role of protozoal organisms, even viruses. There are some beneficial viruses that are in the gut. That balance of what's going on in there does so many things in terms of protecting the horse immunologically and steering the immunological system, but also in terms of what is produced there. So we know that that a better microbiome, one with more diversity of the microbes, is going to be more efficient. So then that gets back to that feed efficiency thing. We know that there are things that we can do with essentially the same amount of calories that improve the efficiency of what we're putting in there. We're allowing those microbes to do a better job of extracting the nutrients from what's in there. And we know that by supporting the gut, we can do that. One of the other important differences between those two systems that we have to remember is that a lot of the absorption that happens in the body is in the small intestine. So if you're a cow, you break all the stuff down in the front, and then it goes through the small intestine after the 4 compartments, where it can be absorbed really efficiently. So the colon in cattle is actually pretty small. Whereas in horses, a lot of those nutrients are going to pass by undigested through the small intestine and then have to be absorbed in the rear end, where it's not necessarily as effective. So the things that are absorbed in the small intestine are going to be the sugars and the fats and some of the amino acids, if they're broken down ahead of time. Otherwise, they have to be processed in the rear of the horse. The last thing to say is that a lot of the energy that a horse receives is actually from these volatile fatty acids. So we think of glucose, and we know that it's absorbed. It's a big topic, especially with metabolic horses, right? That glucose is absorbed in the small intestine, fructose also, and goes into the bloodstream where it can do all its various jobs. But about 70 to 80% of the energy that a horse lives on, a horse that's on forage, comes from those volatile fatty acids, that are produced back there and then can be used for energy. The horse is actually efficient at making glucose in the liver from those, but also those can be used for energy more directly too. So it just gets back to how important the processing that happens in the hindgut really is, and how we need to take steps to ensure that we're not harming that and that we're enhancing it when that's a possibility.
I love that. And I love that you brought up the cool burning fuel, because I feel like before I came to Platinum eons ago, that's not something I understood fully as a writer, and why, for instance, that ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s is so important, is to focus on that cool burning fuel with sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Because although the horses might make it, they don't make it enough, to use what they need. And they're a lot like people in the way that we all get ample omega-6 fatty acids from our diets, but bringing those omega-3s in, it sounds like such a buzzword. We hear it all the time, but we hear it for a reason. They're really important. So I love that. And the cool burning fuel is so important for these athletes. But, I want to not really switch gears, but, a little right now. And I want to dig into some misconceptions because I feel like nutrition is a topic that is wrought with misconceptions. Typically, the best intentions, right? We always say at Platinum, horse owners love their horses. And some of the misconceptions that are out there, or the quote unquote mistakes, if you will, in feeding horses are paved on the road of good intentions. Like people love their horses, they want to give them the best, but they might not have adequate information to make those choices to the best of their ability. So I want to paint a picture of what we should actually be feeding through maybe discussing some of the things that are out there as misconceptions and we might not want to be doing. So Dr. Durham, forage first. Why do we educate so strongly that a forage first approach is so important? And what forage type should we be considering? And I'm going to come to Dr. Polkes after this because I have kind of a specific question for her on this too. So talk to me about forage there.
Well, I mean, from the very sort of simplistic approach, that's what horses in the wild, natural horses would be grazing all day, right? They would have stuff in their stomachs. They would have long stem stuff. That's what their bodies handle the best. When you look at some of the facts, obviously colic is one of the scary things that horses and horse people deal with. And one of the things that has, there have been lots of studies that have looked at risk factors for colic. And one of the things is if you increase grain level, concentrate level above a certain level, you increase the risk of colic. And if you double that, you double the risk of colic. So there are a couple of reasons for that. One is when you look at the way a horse's stomach sort of works, it should have a constant mat of hay in there. Not necessarily hay, but forage, right? If they're grazing constantly, then they're going to get this sort of trickle feeding effect where they're always going to have some stuff in there. One of the things we know that happens with a grain meal is that it leaves pretty quickly, leaving the stomach empty. The other thing is that grain, so interestingly, starch, which is one of the main components of grain. So say corn is going to be 70% starch. So starch is a long chain of glucose molecules that are bonded together. The body produces an enzyme called amylase, a little bit in the saliva, more in the pancreas, that helps to break that down into smaller chunks. And then those chunks get broken down by another enzyme, and then the glucose can be absorbed. Interestingly, dogs, pigs, they produce much more amylase than horses do, because horses normally would be grazing and they're dealing more with grasses. So they're not as well equipped to handle particularly large doses of grain. The amylase is insufficient to break down enough of the starch. This is part of why when they're studying laminitis, one of the ways that they can create laminitis in horses is by overloading starch, because the body's unable to process it all. It goes back to the hindgut, rapid fermentation, acidosis. There are a bunch of things that happen there. And so that is one of the sort of weak links in the equine system that we have to deal with. So that's one of the reasons. And their grains and concentrates absolutely have their place. But I think the emphasis should always be on, can we get by with just hay? For horses in limited work, more often than not, they can. For horses in heavy work, there are horses that have been to the Olympics that get no grain, show jumper that wins gold, no grain, platinum.
He's talking about Will Simpson, ladies and gentlemen.
I am.
Full name names.
But I think that's a really important lesson, that we sort of believe that without grain, they're not going to have enough fuel to compete. And certainly for, say, a racehorse that's just going all out, there are times where you absolutely need to supplement. There are also times where you need to increase, say, protein or certain other things to match what's maybe not in the diet. But horses, again, get the vast majority of their energy from the long stem, basically indigestible stuff. That's what does the heavy lifting for them energy-wise. So if we can enhance that, then we're doing the horse a lot of favors. And again, I think there are a lot of studies that show that the stomach is happier with long stem stuff in it. The colon is happier with long stuff in it. Happier is, of course, the appropriate medical diagnosis that they studied. Was the colon happy? But just in terms of function, I think we really see that horses tend to thrive if they can be on forage first. Again, that doesn't eliminate other feeds, but I think it should be what we emphasize.
I'm so glad you could join us, ladies and gentlemen, to talk about happy colons today. We're always good for that here. So Dr. Polkes, I want to come to you next, and pretty much, discuss what Dr. Durham said as well, because I know you have some thoughts on this too, in terms of forage, in terms of the grains and the concentrates, for not just healthy horses, but you're also seeing a lot of cases who are experiencing everything from gut dysbiosis to, ulcer cases to metabolic cases and that type of thing. So what say you? What are your thoughts on forage, grains and concentrates, not just for healthy horses and what we should be doing on a daily basis, but what are you considering for some of the horses experiencing the conditions that you see on a daily basis?
Thank you. And there's a few things that you said, and I think one thing is true, that people, some of the nutritional things that I see, it usually does really come from a good place, and just not, a lack of understanding, what we should be doing, but trying to do the best for horses. So, forage first, yes. And I think some important things that need to be considered that include that are that, as Matt was talking about, grazing, it is really important. And it's not just what they are ingesting, it is the movement. So horses moving around, and they move, as I said, they can move miles in a day. And that's really important for GI function. I always say to people, if you sat at your desk all day and then somebody took you out and had you run, you might get muscle cramps, you might injure your muscles, your, ligaments. And that's the thing, is that, if you're moving, then that's, much better for your body for athletic horses. So it is not just what they're ingesting, but it is also how they are ingesting it. And with that, I always like to plug the very important thing that horses are herd animals. They are social creatures. And as much as you can, socialization is really important. Horses need to touch other horses. They need to groom other horses. I know that for different reasons, sometimes horses have individual paddocks. If they can see each other at least, or touch each other, is the best thing. But even in a barn situation, having walls where they can't see each other can create problems, and can create, GI issues, or whatever else, behavioral problems, those kinds of things, because it's really, really important. So then what about the forage? So that's the other thing, is not all hay is created equal. And we do have the ability to get hay testing done. There's lots of companies that will do that. Cumberland, Equa Analytics, there's, other ones that will do that. And a lot of the feed companies where you get your hay from will either have a hay analysis or be able to help provide one. And it's important to understand what that hay is, because looking at it, you cannot tell, you know, and while some horses, back to the different needs, some horses, if they do have an endocrine metabolic condition like insulin dysregulation, and they need a lower non-structural carbohydrate hay, NSC hay, then that might be something important for them. But another horse that doesn't need that, they may need something that's richer in nutrition. Also, I always look at the hay and I sort of get my hands on it. And if I'm like, ow, because there's tons of stems and things, that stuff is also poking them in the mouth. And so it is the hay quality itself that's important. Some hays, they're too stemmy. Some are, some horses might need a softer hay. So there's a lot of individual, variation with that. But having hay tested as you can and understanding what you're feeding is really important. The other thing I'll say about that is I am a proponent of slow feeders. I really like slow feeders because that does mimic the more natural grazing behavior. So they have to sort of pull small amounts. When they're chewing, they're producing saliva. That helps to buffer the stomach. And it does produce, at least more of a more natural grazing behavior. And it's good for a lot of things. So fiber first is very important, but also what kind of fiber is important. And I think people really need to look at the hay and understand the hay. And sometimes we need to make changes in the hay. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is the, well-meaning thing. And I think one of the things that I see a lot are people that want to feed their horses like we eat, and that there's, natural things out there and well-intentioned, but some things we have to think about are what horses are meant to eat. And there are certain things that they may not encounter in the wild that may not agree with their digestive system, just like there are people who have gluten allergies or allergies to whey or milk or any of those things. And so when Matt was talking about the small intestine, I have seen, a fair number of horses with inflammation in their small intestine, and we can't always pinpoint what it is, but sometimes that's where I'm going back and saying, like, what are we feeding them? And sometimes they're getting fed something that may have ingredients that they might not normally eat, they might not normally encounter, and they may get inflammation, and then they can't digest properly, and then they're not getting the nutrients. And so it does get complex, and I try to keep things as simple as possible. And that may be a balancer with good quality forage. It may be that a horse does need more grain for a high level of nutrition, but there's just I see a lot of over supplementation that I think we have to be really careful about. And really looking at ingredient labels. Like when we're always told, you go to the grocery store and, if you look at something that's like a million ingredients, have a lot of fillers, you should look at the back of a feed bag. You should look at the supplements. And if it has tons of stuff that you don't recognize, or like a huge long ingredient list, maybe talk to your veterinarian and say, like, is this something that I should be feeding my horse? Is there any information or data on this? Because they have a very delicate GI system. And when we mess that up, when we, mess up the microbiome, when we do all these kinds of things, we can really throw them for a loop and have a lot of problems.
100%. And I mean, again, the best of intentions, right? But we tend to, as horse owners, and because of our own lifestyles, we feed horses very contrary to how they evolved in nature and how they're meant to eat. And feeding them those large meals throughout the day, a lot of them get 1, 2, at best 3 sometimes. So the slow feeders can be such a great resource to help that gut motility be working all day long, as they're in between the big meals. But I love what you said about reading labels. Like after you work at Platinum Performance, you become an obnoxious, incessant label reader for your own family. And so my family's like, just stop. But it's important. And I think a lot of people don't really realize a lot of the ingredients that go into our own food and that are highly processed and contrary to how humans are designed to eat. But it's the same thing for our horses. There's a lot
It is.
byproduct ingredients that do make certain feeds less expensive to produce. And once you know, it's hard to unknow, and it's a little scary. So it is something, as the people that are in charge of our horses' destiny and their health, it's important to pay attention to those things 100%. So I'm glad you brought that up. And Dr. Durham, I want to shift to you for a minute because there's a term we use at Platinum. We always talk about building a strong foundation with the diet. So what does that mean? Why is it actually a pretty simple approach? And how do we know as riders what our horses need in terms of forage, supplements, and so on? It kind of goes back to filling holes in the diet, but I think every horse is unique, right? There's always going to be specific circumstances that we need to address. But as a base biological need, it's actually pretty simple. When you look at what horses need fundamentally and kind of the way that we need to approach it as riders, I think we as riders do a fantastic job of overcomplicating things. So how do you build that strong foundation? What do they really need on a base level before we start? And that's to thrive, not just to stay alive, but what do they need to thrive? And then we move on to the individual circumstances, just like we have. There's some horses with seasonal allergies and metabolic concerns and crummy hooves and that type of thing. But at a base level, what do they need to thrive?
Well, I think, what's really interesting is that all of those systems, whether it's growing better hooves or, building more muscle or having a shiny hair coat, being more likely to conceive, all comes down to this sort of cellular health idea. And I think this was one of the things that that struck me with Dr. Herthel, because when he developed Platinum Performance, I think most people don't realize it was not intended as a commercial product. He was doing it because he, as a surgeon, he would, do surgery, and he would do all the things he knew how to do. And then the horses just weren't coming along as quickly as he wanted or as well as he wanted. So he started thinking about, well, when horses are thriving, what are they getting? And to him, the ideal was a horse that's on a really good quality pasture. And what that means isn't necessarily, 100% bluegrass pasture, but a horse that's grazing is probably going to be getting some forbs, and they're going to get some clover, and they're going to get this sort of mix, but also they're going to, and not every green pasture has this, right? The right minerals, the right amino acids, the right balance of omega-3 fatty acids. And that, back to what you were saying earlier, Jesse, the omega-6 fatty acids, we have to remember, yes, omega-6 fatty acids are essential fatty acids. They're important for skin health, all sorts of things. But it's extremely rare for a horse to be deficient in omega-6 fatty acids. And more often than not, they're getting way beyond what they should. particularly with certain oils and things that are taking them sort of away from what we would find in pasture. In pasture, you're going to have roughly a two 2 to 1 up to 7 to 1 of omega-3 fatty acids to every one omega-6. So what they're used to eating should have more. And there are a couple things that are really important that Dr. Herthel recognized. One is, as grass matures, even while it's standing, if it's less green, if it's later in the year, certainly we know, Jesse, as Californians, that we live in the Golden State, and it's partly called that because the grass, even if it's lush and has a lot of nutrition left in it, it's not green anymore. We won't say brown. That's why we call it golden. But he recognized that the omega-3 levels had dropped. Vitamin E and other fat-soluble vitamin levels drop. Even good quality hay, still green, the omega-3 levels, the vitamin E levels, a lot of those things will drop. So even the horse that's getting adequate energetic nutrition is not getting all of those other essential things in their diet. So again, will that horse live? Yes. But that's where that strong foundation comes from, plugging in those gaps. And that's why his original recipe he called pasture in a bucket, because he was trying to address those potential deficits of mineral, amino acids, vitamins, and omega-3 fatty acids in particular. And he was thinking about gut health even then, because he knew that the mucilage of the ground flaxseed is actually really helpful in terms of its coating ability for the surfaces of the gastrointestinal tract, but also as a prebiotic. We weren't really talking about that back then, but that's something that nourishes some of the good bacteria. So he was really thinking about the overall health in so many ways and trying to keep it as a one bucket system. What I wanted to add on to what Dr. Polk said is even there are a lot of not necessarily great supplements out there. There are a lot of very good quality supplements out there. We're obviously biased at Platinum. We think ours are the best, but there are some very good, reputable companies out there that are not Platinum Performance. And part of the problem is maybe you're using good ingredients, but you might be stacking. One of the things that I would see is selenium. So selenium is a really great nutrient. It's important as an antioxidant. It's important for muscle health. The thyroid needs it. But like with a lot of nutrients, there's this sort of narrow therapeutic window of selenium. If you're extremely low, you're talking about white muscle disease. If you're extremely high, you're talking about those polo ponies that got a bunch, a 10x dose IV and died. In the middle, you're thriving. But the problem is if you're a little bit low, you're not thriving. And this is hoof quality, this is muscle, this is all sorts of antioxidant levels. So we need to have enough. But then the problem is if you get a little bit high, that selenium, well before you actually get toxic, you start to have some of the same problems in terms of hoof and hair coat quality, and muscle function, immune function. So it's not uncommon for people to be giving 5 supplements, and if each one has selenium in it, you're giving too much selenium. And that's a problem. You may actually be causing harm. A lot of these things, even if they're good ingredients, if they're not in balance, can be a problem.
Yeah. Oh. I love that. I mean, there's so many, everything you were saying, I'm like, I love a lot of what you just said. And, fun fact to start off with, Dr. Herthel Dr. Herthal passed away in 2018. And I mean, you all have obviously heard us mention him a million times so far in this podcast alone. He's somebody that we hold very dear. Just a brilliant, wonderful man. But as brilliant as he was at the science and at medicine, he was not a brilliant namer. So he wanted to name platinum in a bucket. Platinum Performance was supposed to be called Equiminimin until Mrs. Sue Herthal stepped in and said, "That's terrible. No one's ever going to see the benefit of this product if you name it that." Welcome, Platinum Performance. So we always thank Mrs. Sue Herthal for our company being around as long as it has, because we weren't destined for greatness if Doug was at the helm of naming.
Equiminimin, yeah.
Equiminimin, casher in a bucket. So, but the concept was there. That was his goal, right? Is to get as close to nature as humanly possible, to fill those gaps that even good quality forage leaves behind, right? Because of what Dr. Durham was saying. And I remember what you just said blew my mind when I first started at Platinum, and I got to learn, under Dr. Herthal himself. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I have been missing this as a rider because I thought I was doing the right thing. I was feeding good quality hay, right? That was enough for my horse. But it wasn't, because I had no idea that even when you feed the best quality hay, and we have all of this data that shows that when you dig into it, 6 weeks post-harvest. That's not old hay, y'all. 6 weeks post-harvest, and it plummets in omega-3 fatty acids. It plummets in vitamin E. These are dramatic, way more than 50% decreases. They're big. And so I remember thinking, I get it now. Like, I understand, because we hear this a lot. Why do I need to supplement if I'm feeding good quality hay? And I think at its very lowest level, that's the why, is that even good quality hay has some deficiencies there, and you're not necessarily giving your horse everything they need. And I also like what you just said, Dr. Durham, about the stacking, because, and I know Dr. Polkes feels this way too, you can be feeding with the best of intentions, right? And we always laugh. We're pretty famous at Platinum for talking people out of purchasing things versus talking them into it, because our horses, most of the time, do not need an entire array of supplements to get the job done. Build the strong foundation, take a look at the individual case, consult with your veterinarian, talk to people like us who do consult with your veterinarian, and see what the case really does need. And most of the time, we start with good quality forage. We typically tend to minimize grains and concentrates. And then we typically say, start with one of the foundation formulas, right? Choose a Platinum Performance Equine or a Platinum Performance CJ or DJ or GI, whatever the most appropriate is for the case. And let's see how they do. A lot of the time, the horse does really well on a very simple diet like that. And then if we do have, more specific needs, if the horse is still suffering from seasonal allergies or hoof problems or whatever it is, then let's take it from there. But I think simple is a beautiful thing with a lot of horses, and involving your veterinarian. We get a lot of calls from people who are frustrated that can't walk into their local feed store and find Platinum. And we're actually really proud of that. We're okay with that. Nutrition belongs in the hands of the equine veterinarian. And it belongs in the hands of people like Dr. Durham and Dr. Polkes, who know that horse's biology. They know that horse's medical history. They know what's going on. And making sure that you consult your veterinarian is huge. And we stand on that soapbox all day long, because they are able to step in and help make things simple. And they are able to phone a friend with people like us, that do this every single day. And so I want to turn it to Dr. Polkes real quick, because I know you feel strongly about all of this too, and choosing the right companies to partner with, making the right decisions together with your veterinarian, and making sure that you're doing right by the horse.
Yeah. And I think, there's just so many very, very basic things. And that is, if someone is thinking like, this is a lot of information and I don't know where to go with this, I think that the things that we really need to think about first is just looking at, first of all, understanding and making sure that you know everything that your horse is getting, and so if you start, as I said, with the hay, just look at the hay. And also you can look at consumption. Like if horses are wasting a lot, there may be a reason for that, but understanding what's in the hay and how you're feeding it. But then when you go to the grains and whatever feed that you're feeding, make sure you look at the bag, look at what level of performance your horse is at, whether they are retired or they are in moderate work or they are in a heavy workload, and what that feed requires for that, how much you need to feed of it. And there are some feeds that have a very, what I call a high feed rate. You need to feed 10 pounds a day, let's say, because there are some feeds that are meant for horses that may not be able to consume long stem, like older horses. Like if you look at the senior feeds, they need a lot because they're really made for horses that don't have the ability. Back to Matt mentioned the importance of dental care and all of those things. And so they have a high feed rate because they're getting their fiber from their feed rather than from the hay if they can't do that. But otherwise, you shouldn't need to feed a lot of the grains. It should be a lower feed rate. Or maybe it's just that you need a balancer or, a platinum product, something, and then some of the feed on top of it where you don't have to have the full amount because you're getting all the vitamins and minerals. But so I think that's where you start is my horse getting the right amount? I don't really like to mix a lot of different feeds because I think that gets too complicated. So I think sticking to one, and I'm talking about grains, sticking to one is probably the best. Of course, there are individual cases, and then start to look at the supplements and see, like, do I have overlap? Do I, can I get all this in a more concise way? If my horse is on a good quality grain and it's on a supplement and I'm feeding a mineral balancer, that may be too much because you probably don't need that. And you can do harm. There are some things like selenium. There are, other products that can be harmful in high amounts. And so we do need to be careful about that. So I think it is really those things and looking at ingredients that are really important and considering trying as much as you can within the capacity to have your horses get out grazing, all of the important life things that do add to nutrition and well-being.
100%. I mean, I love that. And I think when the supplementation part of it comes in, ask the questions, of the companies that you're going to be working with, because there are, safety factors that come into it. Well beyond the efficacy factors, right? You want the product to work.
True.
But you want it to be safe and you want to do no harm first. And so like Dr. Durham said, our industry, like virtually every other on planet Earth, has some really amazing companies in it who are doing things right. And it also has some who are out for profit, not necessarily for the horse. And so I would just say from being, in the supplement industry for so long, the things you learn are, first of all, read the labels, look for clean ingredients, look for a company that you can trust. And how you tell if it is a company you can trust is you call and ask the questions. And that should be transparent answers that you get. Show me the research that it works in horses. Show me your quality testing. How do you source your ingredients? These are all really important things. Do you make your own formulas? Ask all the right questions because you do want to make sure that the safety and efficacy data are there. Because it's something that's going into your horse, especially if you're a tested athlete. There's a lot of riders, more so on the English side than on the Western side, but they're tested for controlled and prohibited substances. So
Yep.
just be cautious, be careful, be an advocate for your horse, and make sure that you're choosing the ones that are doing it right. We are not the only ones that are doing it right. Of course, we're very confident in how we're doing it, but just ask the questions, before you make the decisions. And one more thing I want to ask you guys. I want to ask a few more things, but one more misconception that I think is important to address, and something that you will rarely ever hear Platinum do is to, we respect a lot of our competitors. They're great companies who have a lot of reputable information. So you're not going to hear us talk poorly about anybody in the industry. One thing I will stand on a soapbox about is corn oil. And I want to ask you both about that, because that is a very common misconception where we will get a lot of calls. And I'm sure, Dr. Polkes, you get a lot of questions on a daily basis about this. My horse is a tough keeper. I don't like its top line, not as shiny as I want. I want to feed it corn oil. And it's something that makes us shudder a little bit when we hear that, because it is still so common out there. Why is that not necessarily a great choice in terms of a fat, or it's the opposite of a cool burning fuel? But in terms of that omega-3, omega-6 ratio, and that there's actually some dangers involved in that. So why would you recommend against feeding corn oil?
Is that me? Would you like me to? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I wasn't sure if that was, yeah.
I think that,
there, yeah, it was something that was very commonly done many, many years ago. And then there was some data to show that it can actually be pro-inflammatory, and it can actually cause more problems. And so I think that there is conflicting data. So I have, had people say, well, I've heard that it's good. And I, from what I have seen, and, what I see out there is that there are, concerns about it being pro-inflammatory. And also there's a lot of plenty of other, products that don't have conflicting data. So it is not something that I use as a fat source. Again, it's not the right ratios and whatnot, but, I think it can actually be pro-inflammatory. So, I do think, back to your point of researching things, looking things up, asking your veterinarian, talking to your veterinarians, and really, not just because this is what we did 20 years ago. There are things that we know now that we didn't know then. And there are lots of other alternatives now that we have superior products that we know are healthy for the gut, that there's not a reason to do that.
100%. Dr. Durham, anything to add?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it really does come down to the omega-3 to 6 fatty acid ratio. And it's, most vegetable oils have sort of what we would consider a negative omega-3 to 6 fatty acid ratio, where they're high. Say safflower oil is about 10 omega-6 to 1 omega-3, not great. Corn oil is about 56 to 1 omega-6. So it's vastly overburdened with omega-6. And as Dr. Polkes pointed out, there have been studies that have looked at the inflammatory cytokines. So cytokines are those signaling molecules that the body uses to send a lot in the immune system, to send on and off signals. Hey, you can quiet down, or there's an infection, we need to ramp up. So the pro-inflammatory cytokines are the ones that happen during inflammation. And you can see, just measuring what's circulating in the body at any given time, if you add corn oil to the diet, you will increase some of those pro-inflammatory cytokines that are circulating in the system. For the nerds out there, interleukin-1 beta, tumor necrosis factor, matrix metalloproteinases, some of those will increase. Um, there was some work that suggested that corn oil might be beneficial for gastric ulcers. And part of the idea was that you're actually using the inflammatory side the of the arachidonic acid cycle. Basically, there's this pushback between omega-3 and omega-6 leaning towards inflammation or suppressing that to a degree. And the idea there is that if you leverage the pro-inflammatory side, that's the side that produces prostaglandin E. What they found, though, was that when they studied that, there wasn't a change in prostaglandin E, and that wasn't actually the main issue with it. And if you dive deeper, there are other studies, particularly in rodent models, where the control, where they were trying to create ulcers, they used corn oil to create the ulcers. So for me, the idea that it's protective, there may be a coating effect in some horses, but none of the studies to me were really definitive. And I think all of them, actually, a lot of those were where there was evidence that it was pro-inflammatory in the system. So I think the overall benefit, yes, the body can use it as energy, but this is why for us flax oil is so good, because it has a much better ratio, close to 4-to-1 in the oil itself, for omega-3 to 1 omega-6. So the ratio that's more like what horses would be getting when they're grazing in pasture. So I think that's where corn oil, again, I was taught to use it as a supplement for thin horses, and I did. And they didn't always thrive the way you wanted, certainly not the shiny hair coat and building muscle and that sort of thing. So for me, it's a no.
Bottom line, it's a no. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and I think that we've had a amazing discussion today on, all things nutrition, what to actually feed your horse, what to consider, at the baseline, horses have a very similar biological need, but it's veterinarians like Dr. Durham and Dr. Polkes who are also dealing with those cases who do have some unique requirements because of who they are and their individual needs and maybe some conditions that they're dealing with. But I think at, a base level, it's choosing a good quality source of forage. It's paying attention to their lifestyle. That is part of it. Diet and lifestyle go hand in hand. It's making sure that to your greatest ability, you're paying attention to that herd mentality, that the horse is getting some sunshine and getting the chance to walk around every day and not in a box stall all day long every day if you can help it. Choosing that good quality forage, making sure that you're paying close attention to the choices that you're making in terms of grains and concentrates, minimizing when possible, but consulting your veterinarian on the case. And then when it comes to choosing supplements, do your homework before you make a purchase, and know that you're choosing the right choice for your individual horse. Know that more is not always more. So when you do a direct comparison between formulas, know that higher levels are not necessarily the best choice every time. It's making sure those ingredients are working synergistically with another in the right quantities to maximize efficacy. And then the form of the nutrient. There's actually a lot of different forms of nutrients out there. Some of them are not bioavailable. Cells do not uptake those nutrients. They don't utilize them like they should. And they're often used because they're cheaper, quite frankly, in formulas. So make sure you're finding the right, most bioavailable source of those nutrients, and the companies that you're choosing are choosing the right sources. They're doing the homework for you. And then just choose companies that are reputable to work with, and make sure that, it's a big deal. You're the one in charge of your horse's safety, and their ability to thrive. So choose the right companies, the good actors, the people that are on your side. And, Dr. Polkes, I kind of want to turn it back over to you, because we are always, standing firm that equine veterinarians should be involved in these decisions. And there are, though, a lot of veterinarians that are like, you know what, not my wheelhouse. Nutrition is not my specialty. But I can phone a friend and, bring people in, like the nutritionist at Platinum or whomever. But I know that you're really passionate about this too, about asking the right people for their opinion on this. So who do you advise? You have obviously significantly more experience in this area than the average bear, but who do you advise your clients to talk to, or what approach do you take to make sure that they're getting quality information?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And sometimes it is difficult because we don't have a plethora of equine nutritionists, which I, wish that they were easier to find. But I agree with you that the first thing I do is, I people will reach out to me if they're, my clients, but, talk to your veterinarian, but do your homework first. Look on the web. And the things that I agree with, what you look for is not just my horse did great and beautiful pictures, but where is there any research, where, just information on the product. And I always worry if you can't find the ingredient list, if you can't find, because there are times when it's like, what is in this? I don't know. Or if everything is proprietary, then we just don't know what that is. And then there are equine nutritionists at some universities, and there are equine nutritionists at Platinum, and there are equine nutritionists at other companies, and those can be good resources as well. I just think the most important thing is to just, again, besides reading the labels, is not to just put them on it thinking that because it says all natural, because it says not testable, because it says all these things, that it's okay. Because there are things out there that really are not okay, and we can do more harm than good. And I think, again, asking the questions. I wish I sort of had a list of people, but I don't. But there are resources out there. And a lot of times the veterinarians, they have people that they work with that they really like. So ask your veterinarian if you aren't comfortable doing that. But I also think veterinarians, like, I ask the question, and we say this, but even if your veterinarian doesn't ask, when they come out to see your horse, whether it's for a routine, wellness visit or whatever it is, provide them with that information. This is all the stuff my horse is on, because there may be something in there that they go, oh, aha, like, should not be on that, or that could be part of the problem. So that can be really helpful too, is to just make sure that you provide them with everything, or I just started this thing, or, whatever it is, because sometimes it's the key.
Yeah, sometimes it's the key. Dr. Durham, last thoughts?
I think we've covered lots of good ground. I mean, I think ultimately, we want to feed horses the way they work the best. In the ideal situation, that means forage first, but it also means filling in any little gaps that we think might be there. But I really like what Dr. Polk says about, feeding isn't just the stuff you give, but the circumstances. And because horses really are social creatures, that's part of why we love them. And they thrive when they're able to interact with other horses and move around. And I think encouraging feeding circumstances that allow movement and interaction go beyond just, again, the fuel the fuel component and help horses thrive.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're paying attention to our horses' health, their performance, their longevity, which is greater than ever before. I mean, these athletes are thriving for much longer, more fruitful careers than ever before because of things like this, paying attention to their lifestyle, their nutrition, and that root cause approach, that preventive approach. So I thank you both tremendously for being here with me today. We have the coolest friends, and Dr. Holtz, for making that phone call. You know, it's funny, this podcast, we are a nutrition company, but we talk equine veterinary medicine on this podcast all the time, and fractures and laminitis and all of these cool things. But to circle back and talk about really, you know, what we do day in and day out every day, which is the nutrition, is pretty great because it is so important to these horses and keeping them healthy. You know, we love to help healthy horses stay healthy. So thank you for the idea. Thank you for the inspiration for this week's episode. And Dr. Durham, I really appreciate you bringing your expertise to the table as well, sir. So thank you both for being here. And to all of those listening, we always appreciate you coming along for the ride and learning right alongside me. And between now and the next episode, I hope you take care, y'all. Join us next time. I'm Jessie Bengoa with the It Starts Within podcast from Platinum Performance. Talk soon.